Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of White Line Fever Kicks for 2022, if that is the year it is. Really got to, I think I've started about 10 shows by saying, really got to get in the habit of doing this more regularly. But anyway, it's the thought that counts. I think there's a very important thing happening at the moment in Huddersfield, and that is that the Rugby League Museum was to be at the George, the birthplace of rugby league. And by any measure, is there any disputing this? The local council, the Kirk Leagues Council, have reneged on that agreement, and they want to put it somewhere else in the city of Huddersfield. And again, perhaps to oversimplify, our next guest will tell me if this is the case or not. The only reason Huddersfield got the Rugby League Museum was because it was going to be at the George Hotel. So it's fair to say the sport of rugby league, generally, I would say, not just the RFL, but by extension, the entire sport of rugby league is in a bit of a pickle. And the man who's been on the front line in these discussions with Kirk Leagues Council is the eminent rugby league historian, Tony Collins. He's with me now. Sorry for that long-winded introduction, Tony, but what is the latest?
Well, thanks for having me on, Steve. The latest is that we're really in a position of limbo at the moment. Stop me if this gets too boring, but in early 2020, Rugby League Cares, which is I'm sure people know, is the charitable arm of the Rugby Football League, which looks after the heritage of the game. Rugby League Cares invited interested local authorities and other people to put in a bid to host the National Rugby League Museum. It's something we've been working on for since around about 2014, 2015. We had a series of consultants in to advise us on the best way to go about this. Initially, Rugby League Cares had a partnership with Bradford Council, who were very keen to have the museum in their classic Victorian town hall. But due to changing circumstances at Bradford Council, that partnership came to an end. So in 2020, we put out a tender to other local authorities, and we had 5 serious expressions of interest, and we set up an independent panel of experts to assess all 5 bids, which I was the chair of the panel, but it also included high-level museum professionals, David Hinchliffe, the former Labour MP for Whitfield, who's also been a trustee of various museums, and other people on. So this was a serious body that was looking in an objective way at the different bids. And ultimately, I don't think there's any secret, the 2 bids that were deemed to be the best were those of Kirk Leagues Council, which is where Huddersfield is. It's also the council for Dewsbury and Batley. And Wigan councils, who were bidding alongside Wigan Rugby League Club. However, we felt that Huddersfield's case was stronger because they wanted to put the Rugby League Museum in the George Hotel. The George Hotel is an iconic building, not just for rugby league, but in British sport, because how many other sports can say this is where and when our game started? If you ask football supporters where was the Football Association founded, I'm not sure very many are going to know, but there's a significant percentage of rugby league supporters who will know it's the George Hotel. So this was a fantastic offer from Kirk Leagues Council, and it was a fantastic opportunity for the game to have a proper national museum in the very place where the game was born. However, over the last 4 to 5 months, it's become clear that Kirk Leagues Council no longer want the museum at the George Hotel, and they have now made public statements that it was never their intention to put the museum in the George Hotel. The bid was to have a museum in Huddersfield, and they think there are plenty of other places that would be appropriate for a rugby league museum, but not the George Hotel. So we're now in a position where I guess both parties, the rugby league side and Kirk Leagues Council, are eyeing each other with neither being sure about what the next step is for the other side. So I think it's pretty fair to say we're currently in a state of limbo that will probably resolved fairly quickly.
Resolve in which way?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. The stance of Rugby League Cares is that the stance of Rugby League Cares is that they have not been given a formal business plan to site the museum anywhere else. That the original documents that were submitted by Killeen Council to the panel that awarded them the museum were explicitly based on siting the museum in the hotel, and that they hope that Killeen Council will come to their senses and go back to their original offer. The current leadership of Killeen Council, there are council elections in May, so this may change. The current leadership of Killeen Council seems to be digging its feet in and basically rewriting history by saying, no, we never offered the George Hotel, when it's plain to anybody who can read that was precisely their offer.
Right, so I guess the average person will be saying, well, if it's not at the George, it's just not going to be in Huddersfield. So do we perhaps just not have a museum for another decade? Is that a possible outcome?
Well, that's one of the potential outcomes. I mean, personally, I think there's still a lot of mileage in the idea of a museum, and there are lots of other options, including going back to some of the original bidders for the museum to see whether they're still interested and what options they can provide. At the moment, Rugby League Cares' preferred option is that it goes into the George Hotel. So we'll have to see. I think, though, there is a broader discussion to be had about rugby league heritage if the George isn't available to us. And, I mean, as a sidebar, the George Hotel has laid derelict since 2013. It's not a secret that many people have tried to attract hotel chains to take over the George Hotel, but they haven't found anybody willing to take it over for a whole number of reasons. Not least, it's a listed building, which makes it very difficult to change. It hasn't got a functional car park because it's right next to a railway station. So it's very difficult to imagine how a hotel chain could do that. And in fact, there was a report commissioned by Killeen Council in, I think, December 2021 that advised them that it was not viable to have a hotel or an office block there because it's not an appropriate destination. So hopefully the George Hotel will remain an option. But having said that, heritage is a changing landscape at the moment. So if you like, a static museum, a building as a museum is one option, but there are also many examples of successful travelling museums. And given Rugby League's geographic spread, it would be good for people in Whitehaven to be able to have access to a Rugby League museum if there was a travelling museum. I mean, these are some of the things we were keen for the actual static museum to do. So I think until we've resolved the situation with Killeen Council, then it's difficult to say where we're going to go. I mean, Rugby League heritage will still be a major part of the game. I think one of the things that we've found, whenever we've spoken to anyone about the museum, everybody loves the idea. Everybody's got ideas about what should go in. And also, I mean, this is one of the things about the game. Everybody in the game, whether fan, player, official, has got some idea of the fact that rugby league is a fairly unique history. It's a different history to other sports. So there's a huge amount of potential. There's a huge amount of scope for a museum. And, if it isn't in the George, I think that's a blow, because it would be an unbelievable thing to have the museum in its birthplace in such an iconic building. But if it doesn't, I don't think that's the end of the story by a long, long way.
Okay, well, I guess it's kind of symbolic, isn't it? I mean, the fact that rugby league's birthplace has been derelict since 2013, and now it's vacant, and the game is still being locked out. It's kind of people kind of see it as being symbolic of something broader about the wider health of the sport.
Well, I think I think unfortunately what it does point to is the fact that for whatever reason the sport isn't taken as seriously as it should be by many of the people in powerful positions in the north of England. And I still think that in a lot of ways, rugby league is looked down upon. To some extent, that's a fault of the game in the way perhaps we promote ourselves. But also, I think that's just a fact of life in British society that, British society is so class-ridden, people still view things through the lens of class. That rugby league is often on the receiving end of that, and it doesn't get the respect and attention that it deserves, even within towns like Huddersfield, and there's other places I can mention, where it's absolutely fundamental to the history of those towns and the communities and the people in those towns. So I think it's both a problem with local authorities, it's a problem to some extent with the game, but also I think it reflects that bigger problem. I mean, we've spoken about this before, about the way that rugby league is perceived and portrays itself to the wider world, and that's an issue. And I think underneath, that's one of the issues here as well.
Thanks for joining us, Tony, and everyone. Welcome back to the new year, and you can find us on Twitter at WLF_podcast. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook.com/WLF podcast. And we're also now on Instagram at WLF Pod and Merch. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Steve. My pleasure.